Hello and welcome to ETFtracker, the interactive explorer for Aussie ETFs. In our last video, we went through the website, and in today's video, we're actually going to go through the app. So let's take a look at how to get to the app first of all. So when you get on etftracker.com.au, the website, you navigate over to the apps page, and the first one there is ETFtracker. Now that is the main app, and that's the one that we'll go through today. When you click on that, you get to the home page for the ETFtracker app, and you'll notice that it's actually an embedded app. So we use Microsoft Power BI. It's a great tool if you use a lot of Excel or you've got a lot of data viz in your work. It's a really good tool to use. You've got a button here where you can actually open it up in full screen. You can also click on the share button. That will give you a link where you can share it in other pages. And if you do want to embed it, please feel free to do so. You just need to attribute us, and you can see, you'll have ETFtracker on the page anyway. It's easier to see this in full screen mode, so that's what I'm going to do. So we click on that button there, and these things work best in they work best in desktop mode. So if you are on phone, it's actually a lot easier to look at it over here on the desktop. It's too small on the phone. We will work on a mobile app at some point during the year. So you've got a couple of different sections here, but the landing page is going to be what's called this dashboard area. So this is the section that you're in. There's different categories within each of those sections as well. So the sections are dashboard, where we're at, analytics, a lot more detail there. Single ETF view, there's a reason why we have that page there, and then there's some interactive data stories. And so what we're looking at here is the category of 1 month returns. So the landing page, keeping it nice and simple, just looking at what's going on across different categories of ETFs. So not individual ETFs, but the 200 plus that are on the Australian Stock Exchange, Securities Exchange, as well as Chi-X. They go into these different categories, and you can either view it in terms of, say, 1 month return performance. You can view it as separate axes or the same, so it defaults to the same. If you click on separate, you can see how they move around a little bit there in a bit more detail. It's not too bad for the performance returns, but it does make a change when you look at inflows and FUM. And overall, we can see some key metrics here being the latest performance, and this is for March 2021. So the average 1 month total returns was 2.38%. We had 2.4 billion of FUM, and we had 102.1 billion, 2.4 billion of fund inflows. So that's net inflows, and the market is now at 102.1 billion in terms of FUM. The categories here, the way it works is that in terms of performance, well, green is good, red is bad, red is negative performance. So we can see that this month there were only 2 areas. So credit being fixed income and bonds, credit type ETFs, global focus ones were negative, and commodities were in the red as well. But everything else had positive performance, contributing to that overall 2.4% returns, okay? And then if we go to net inflows, we can see how things are different there. So because we're on the same axis, you can see that most of the inflows go into equities. And so this is something that, people have known about, but if you look at the data, it actually makes it really clear that when you're looking at, some of these data, these are net inflows. Most of it is going into Australian equities, global equity, and this is all equity kind of focused ETFs, credit, domestic credit. There's quite a bit going into commodities, cash and currency as well, but the others look fairly flat when you compare it to the billions of dollars that are going into these other areas. But if you wanted to see them separately, so you can see more of the growth in detail, then you click on the separate axis here, and you can see the changes. Then you can do the same for FUM as well. And yeah, that's pretty much it in terms of the dashboard. So the next section is analytics. Okay, so we see more categories shown here on the left-hand side. So we can look at performance, we can look at yield, liquidity, transactions, the spread, inflows and outflows, FUM. We can do some other comparisons, and there's some table data as well. And within each page, so right now we're looking at performance, there's a couple of key table categories, right? So you can look at ranks by category or by ETP. ETF and ETP are pretty interchangeable. exchange traded product or exchange traded fund. So it's referred to as ETP on the ASX website, so we use that. And you can see 1 month versus 1 year performance, 3 year versus 5, and there's a historical performance one as well that shows cumulative growth. And within these, so we're looking at 1 month, 1 year, 3 year, and 5 year. And then you've also got the different filters at the top of the page. So wherever you see this kind of bar, and you've got the drop downs, you can look at things by different filters. So for example, if we wanted to look at beta shares, and this is we haven't picked a month yet. So if we pick, say, the month of March, so what we can see there is we can see that for beta shares, their property related ETFs are the ones that outperformed in March. It did really well. What didn't do so well was commodities, and that might have changed over different periods. So you can use the filters there. The good thing about Power BI is that you can actually interact. Okay, so because we've chosen beta shares there, we can click on the latest month and we can see the filter context change the table as well. Okay, so I don't necessarily need to go up here. I can keep the charts here and just click on each one of the bars to see what performance would have been like for other tables. So we've made them related. And as you make those changes as well, you'll see here the KPIs, another set of KPIs just on the right-hand side. So because we've chosen beta shares, we can see that beta shares has 64 funds across 16 different categories. And if we click on one of those categories, we can see, well, we've chosen one category being Asia, and we can see that it's got 3 funds within it. So it's all interactive and connected with the data set. So we'll just clear beta shares here. And you can look at this across different periods. So if you wanted to look at 3-year performance, you would get 3-year performance details here. If you wanted to look at things by ETP, and again, selecting the latest month, we can see that ETPMPD. And if you want to know what that ticker stands for, you just got to hover over the bar and you can see that it is the physical palladium by ETF Securities. The next one was beta shares global income leaders, etc., etc. Okay. So some more interactive, some more, kind of visual type charts. This one here looks at 1 month return versus 1 year. And if we take a look at, say, January 2021, we can see what that scatter plot looks like. We can see how it changed in Feb. We can look at how it changed in the latest month being March 2021, and you can see the context that you filtered on when you do that here, okay? And then if we jump to the 1 month historic, so in this one here, so you can use all these different filters. So let's try something else. Let's look at, say, equity. Let's look at Equity Australia. And so the one that did the best in terms of performance, and mind you, this is going back to 2017, where the data is available for those funds. Some funds only started more recently, so they won't show this information. But click on MVW, so they were there since 2017, and this is their cumulative performance. So that's VanEck Vectors Australian Equal Weight ETF. Okay, so you can see that kind of information here. We can do the same thing for yield. So if we just clear that, we've got the different subcategories. So these are your main categories here, and then there's different subcategories or menus. So we're looking at historic yield, and we can look at it by ETP. Okay, then we can look at other things like liquidity, transaction, spread, inflows, an area that everyone wants to look at more often. So we can see the inflows by category over time. We can see the ranks by ETP. So if we pick the month that we want to look at most recently, so we can see that for March, the most inflows by ETP was for this Hyperion Global Growth Companies Fund. And then usually it would be IOZ, VAS, and A200 because they're the core types of ETFs, so that the ones that people put in their core part of their portfolio because they cover a major index, mostly being the ASX 200 or the ASX 300. And then we can also see FUM, that's another area that's looked at quite often as well. So if we just unfilter on the month, and you can see as we move across the different pages, the filter context stays there. So you can see here how FUM has grown for the whole market. But if you wanted to filter that just on, say, a particular category, we can see that there's 3.2 billion worth of FUM in commodities. It was rising, it had some drops, and has now settled at 3.2 billion. we can actually group a few of these different sectors together. So the sectors here are defined by what the ASX provides in the data set that they release each month. And so there's a number of different Australian equity related ETFs. And so there's 28.2 billion, and we can see what the growth has been like there. Or you can do things by a particular provider. So for example, ETF securities, they're at 3.3 billion. We can see how growth has worked out there. We can look at other ones as well. And as you click through, you can just see more of this kind of information there. So it's quite interactive, and yeah, it's there for free to access. Okay. So the other thing you can do is look at comparisons. Okay, so the reason that we have this is so that you can compare performance across different types. So for example, here we've selected, we've typed in Robo. Okay, so you can clear that and you would see all the different ETFs. But if you typed in something in the search name, you can click on that and you can see the fund that you're particularly looking at there. You can also search things by provider and categories. So we could say, look at ETF securities and pick one of the different funds that they've got here. So they've also got a Robo one, but let's actually compare it to one of the other ETF securities ones. Let's try the, let's do the biotech one, okay? So we can see their performance, and you can do them on different metrics. So let's do 2020, 2021, and we'll do the same for these guys here. It doesn't have to be that same period. I could actually compare it to another period, for example. Okay, so that one wouldn't work because it didn't go back to 2017, but we can do some other type of comparison, okay? So that's that there, and then table is just some further table details. You've got the filters here, but it's more in a table format, so you can scroll through and you can click on each of the headings to change the ranking there. So if we want to look at things by the highest rank over a 5-year period, let's say we pick for 2021, we can see the information as that changes, okay? And then the next section to look at is the single ETF view. So we've had that filter across there for 2021. The reason for the single view is because in the analytics section, we actually only look at one thing at a time. So as you remember, we looked at performance. We also had sections for inflows, FUM. We didn't go into the transactions and volumes, but that is there in transactions, number of trades as well, and overall performance as well as the metrics. So the reason why we've got this single ETF view, so you can see a few of those on the one page for a single ETF or category. So I can look at, say, for example, I want to look at Australian equities, and I want to pick the ticker IOZ, and then I can see that going back to 2017 up until now, what volumes have been. You can see the spikes where they've occurred there, and wherever you see these charts, as you hover over them, you actually see this focus mode come in. So if you see that focus mode button, when you click on that, that actually takes you to a full page view of the chart that you were looking at. And to go back, you click on back to report, and it takes you back to this section. The last section that we'll take a look at is the data stories. So if you didn't want to click around all those other areas, we actually do provide some level of insight with some data stories. So each month these are updated, and you can see the context about what's going on here for each of the 4 sections where we will focus on. So we have a little bit of a summary. We've got the heading there about what this is about. It's 1 month returns versus management expense ratio, which you can see here. You can see the top ranks in terms of categories for management expense ratio, where it's most expensive, where it's least expensive, and you can get a bit of a blurb here. And we also provide these filters so that you can change the filters to actually provide some more context. So for example, if we wanted to focus on iShares, we can see what that looks like there in terms of these charts. So there's some level of filtering. You get a lot more in the analytics, a little bit in the dashboard area, and more in the single ETF view. So this just provides another way of looking at the data via data stories. We can look on year-on-year comparisons. In this case, this is year-on-year comparisons for the number of trades. And you can do different categories. We can look at commodities or Australian equities or Asian equities and seeing how they're performing. And then we also look at the non-index trackers. So this view of those ETFs that track an index passively and those that don't. And most of those that don't are active ETFs, and so it's divided up on the ASX and the Chi-X data into what tracks an index versus what doesn't. So we're looking here at the stuff that does not track an index. And then we take a look at flows versus performance here for the latest month. And so you can see actually on the chart here, because there was quite a large influx with the Hyperion Global Growth just being a new listing. They've been around since 2014, but because they were brand new listing, they got to bring their 1.15 billion worth of FUM into the market, sorry, inflows into the market. And what that's meant is that it's kind of harder to see on the chart here, but you could explode that and you can see some further details about that comparison. And that is it. So you've got the dashboard, analytics, single ETF view, and data stories. And those are the sections that each month, whenever we get new data, we update the app. So it's around the 10th or just after the 10th each month for the ASX. A couple of days later, we get the insights from Chi-X and we add that to the mix as well. So that does a little bit of uplift FUM and inflows, and it might, depending on performance of the various active ETFs on Chi-X, that might change performance here. Okay, so if you want some more details, make sure to subscribe to etftracker.com.au, and thank you very much for your time.